I knew it didn't know everything. For those of you who have been living under a rock for the last 2 months or so, that is ChatGPT, and it's been taking the world, the internet, YouTube, you name it, by storm. And not being one who wants to jump on a bandwagon, I did actually want to have a look and see what it is all about, and I can say, yeah, I'm very impressed. But in today's video, I wanted to take a slightly different view, and I wanted to see whether we could use the GPT-3 API from the same people that make ChatGPT and use it from within a .NET application to build an app that provides fairly similar functionality to this, but with a little bit of a twist. And the answer is, yeah, we can do that, and we do it in today's video. Well, hello, wherever you are, whenever you are. Where am I? Melbourne, Australia, as usual. And when is it? It's January 2023. So yes, in today's video, we're going to be building a little .NET application that's going to use the GPT-3 API to give us a little, I guess you'd call it a chatbot, but with a specific use case in mind. And just before we get on with a demo of the app that you're going to build, I did just want to say very quickly, the usual sort of stuff. If you like the video, give it a like. It really just helps me out. And if you've not done so already, maybe think about subscribing, ding the little bell, and if you want, and you'll be notified of any updates that I make this year, of which I'm hoping to make quite a few. Anyway, enough of that stuff. Let's take a look at what you're going to be building today. So let's take a quick look at the app that we're going to be building today. This is the end result, and of course we're going to go through the coding completely step by step. So the tool is, well, the use case, let me talk about the use case first. The use case is you're a developer, you're writing code, you're using Docker, you're using Redis, and you can't remember some command line prompts that you might need to use, such as listing Docker containers, in which case you're in your developer workflow. At a command prompt, you can use our little application. I've just called it Ask, and you can ask a question such as, what command do you use to list Docker, let's say running Docker containers. Okay. And I'll go away. It will use what's called the GPT-3 API, which is by the same group, OpenAI, that ChatGPT is from. And we're using that API. We're providing that question to it. It's responded back, and everything that you can see here in yellow is the response that it's given us, okay? And then what our app does a little bit further is it parses that string, the overall response. So you can see that we've got a question mark here. Sometimes you'll get other things like some textual descriptions or instructions or links to articles as well. And so we want to try and extract the actual command prompt. And what we do is make a guess, and we copy that guess to the clipboard. So in this case, the guess will be correct. It's saying, I'm guessing that Docker PS is the command prompt we want to use. And if I just do a Control V, it's already in the clipboard for us, so we can just hit enter. And we have our answer. So it kind of saves us from going to Google or some other place. And it's just a bit of fun as well. So let's make another go at it. Let's try something else. And I just want to show you some of the limitations, I guess, of certainly how I've built it. So what command do you use to run a .NET 6 project? Let's see what we get with that. It's the same idea. I'll go away, use the GPT-3 API. And this is a good example of what I'm talking about. It's kind of given us an answer for not using the command prompt, but using Visual Studio, okay? It actually puts us in here, the command to run the .NET 6 project is, okay, so it's not really what we want at all. And all my little guessing routine has done is guessed that the command prompt would exist within the last line of the response. And that's what it's saying the guess is. And again, if I do a Control V, that's what's in the clipboard. Okay, so in that instance, that's not right. That's not particularly useful. The answer itself wasn't quite what we wanted. So maybe if we finesse the question and we just say .NET Core project without putting a version in it, we'll see if we get a different answer. that we do, we get a different answer, and the answer that we actually want. And again, the only text that was returned would be a few new lines, .NET Run, and I'm guessing .NET Run is the command that we want. Control V, it's there to use. So a bit of fun, quite an exciting little project. I've really enjoyed building it and working with it, and it's still in a very early stage as well, but I think you could actually take it and do some really interesting stuff with it. Anyway, that's the demo. Hopefully it's piqued your interest, and in the next section we'll move on and we'll take a look at ChatGPT itself as well as the API docs for the API that we're going to use. But we'll do that next. So just before we move on with coding, let's just take a quick look at ChatGPT itself. And I'm not going to do any massive amount on this. There's already a million zillion videos on YouTube about this now. Anyway, good old Google has taken us to this landing page. Just before we have a look at ChatGPT, I do want to just call out that it's actually created by this group here, OpenAI, and I'm calling that out for a very specific reason that will become a bit obvious later. But for now, let's have a quick go with ChatGPT. And you can ask it anything you like. Obviously, you can't ask it who I am, or you can ask it who I am. It won't know the answer to that, which is a massive blow to my ego, but it does know a lot of very cool, very important stuff, much more important than who I am, of course. So things like, how do I make a HTTP call with C#? And pretty cool, it will go away, look at its model, and it will tell you what classes you need to use. And I have noticed it will actually give you slightly different responses based on the question, okay? And this is actually quite a different answer to what I've been getting previously, and it's giving us a particular approach using web client, which is interesting. It's actually giving us 3 methods, which is pretty cool. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell too much on that. The nice thing about it though is that you can ask more questions. It retains the context of the thread. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that too much. There's already huge amount of videos on ChatGPT or on YouTube. Now, I was going to close that down. I did call out OpenAI as the group that have created it, and so we're going to be using one of their APIs to create something sort of similar. As you saw in the demo, it's going to allow us to ask questions and get responses back. And it's not technically ChatGPT. It's one of the OpenAI APIs. In this case, the GPT-3 API. Lots of acronyms there. So if we just come back over to Google and we'll just search for OpenAI API and come over here. This is the docs site, or this is the sort of developer portal. Very good, very easy to follow. Some API documentation is kind of confusing. Their stuff, very nice, even given the complexity of the subject matter. So we just log in, again, with the same account that we used for ChatGPT. I will just, traffic lights. I hate these things. Good, continue, and password. And it logs you into the API portal. And again, as I said, the documentation is really rather nice. Now we're going to be using this text completion example here, really, to build our application. But if you come over to documentation, you can, it goes through introduction, it goes through how you can authenticate. So I found this API reference section down here is really kind of the nicest part of the docs. It's, it takes you through pretty much everything you need to do to, build a very simple application. And we're going to be using, tells you all the different models that you can have. We're going to be using this completions model here, which will allow us to submit questions to it and it will come back with answers. Okay, and we're going to integrate that into our console app. All right, but I'm going to cover this in the video, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but again, a really nice documentation website. Highly suggest that you check it out. Now, just before we move on with coding, one thing that you do need to do before we actually start coding is create an API key. So in order to do that, make sure you're logged into the portal, come up to your account, click on View API Keys, and I have a few keys here. I'm just going to delete this one. I'm no longer using that one. And I'm going to create a new key that I'll use for this video, which of course I will delete after the video is completed. So if you attempt to use this, it won't work, unfortunately for you, but I'm going to copy that off and I'm just going to put it into a notepad or something for now. Let me just do that so I don't lose it. Okay, cool. So that's the key I'm going to use for the rest of the video. And the other thing I want to show you just before we actually start coding is they have this rather nice tool at this location here, where you can get my key back. You can actually make some API calls without writing any code. It's rather nice. I'll just paste my key back in here. Excellent. And then you can just start playing around basically with the API. So I'll take that out and we'll see, I don't know, what command prompt do you use to list Docker containers? Because we'll be kind of requesting that same sort of information at our command prompt. You can use the different engines here. I think I'm using this one here, Text DaVinci 001. And again, the docs go through why you would choose one over the other. And you have all these other settings here, which I'm not really going to cover today. And that kind of goes through how much risk it takes in attempting to answer and all that kind of stuff. Click submit. It comes back straight away with Docker PS, which is lovely. And we're hopefully going to get that type of response back from the API when we actually come to using it ourselves, and then we'll just inject that command if we want into the command line and run it. Fantastic. So that's a very whirlwindy tour of ChatGPT, although technically we're not really using that, but we are going to be using this API in the sections that follow. So yeah, next we're going to scaffold up our application. So let's get started. So we're going to scaffold up our application now, and I'm just going to open a command prompt, which has opened on my other screen, and I'm going to change into my working directory. And this will, of course, more than likely be different for yourself, but I'm going to move into my Season 6 folder and move into my Episode 1 folder on my D drive. Quick directory listing, you can see there is nothing there. Now, just before we get going with anything else, the only thing you really need to create today's application is the .NET framework. And the way you can test to see whether that is installed is to type .NET -- version. And I'm using version 6. So long as you get something that starts with a 6, that is all cool. And of course, yeah, the only other thing you will need is an OpenAI account with an API key, which we covered in the last section. So that's all looking good. I'll clear the screen, and then we're just going to scaffold up our console application. So .NET new console, my goodness, I'll give it a name, and I'm just going to call it ask. Okay, so .NET new, we're using the console template, and I'm just going to call this particular application ask. Fantastic. Quick directory listing, you can see the ask application is there, and we'll just change into that. Quick directory listing, you can see there's not much there at the moment, an object folder, a CS proj file, and the program CS file. So let's open that in VS Code by typing code space period. And that also opens VS Code on my other main screen. Fantastic. And you'll more than likely get this pop-up down here around building assets. Just click yes to that. Fantastic. Now, in terms of our project structure, it's not going to get any more complex than this. So we have one CS proj file and we have the program CS file. We're not adding anything else to it. Super, super simple. So the only thing I want to do before we move on to actually doing some proper coding is adding a couple of package references to our CS proj file. So Control and backtick to bring up the integrated command prompt within VS Code, and we're going to add our first package. And the way we do that is by typing .NET add, not ass, add package Newtonsoft JSON. Okay, so this is the one we want here, .NET add package Newtonsoft JSON. And the reason we need that is we're going to be deserializing the JSON response that comes back from the API, basically. And we want to deserialize it so we can get to the response text. All right, and again, using Newtonsoft to do that. Now, if you are not that familiar with deserialization of JSON and all that kind of stuff, you can check out a deep dive I have on that subject over on lesjackson.net. That's part of my .NET Developer Toolkit course if you're interested in that. But I digress. So we need that package, and of course we'll go through how to use this particular package absolutely step by step in this video. Clear the screen, and then we're going to add one more package, and this package is an interesting one actually. It's called text copy, and all it really allows you to do is copy some text to the clipboard, okay? And do you know what? I mean, this package makes it dead easy, but if you didn't have access to this third-party package, it's actually quite tricky to do it from within a console application, as I found out making this video, which really surprised me. Anyway, we've been saved by the people who've created text copy, and it makes it nice and easy. All right, fantastic. So that's all we need for the moment. So maybe take a little brief pause, and then coming up next, we're going to actually start coding our chat bot command line application. So let's get started and do that now. So let's come over to our program class and start coding. I'm going to get rid of the command prompt here to give us a bit more room, and I'm going to get rid of this boilerplate code as we just don't need that anymore. And the first thing I'm going to do is check to see whether we have any command line arguments passed when we start our application. Okay, so args length, if it's greater than 0, then we know we have at least one command prompt. Fix up that formatting, and we're good to go. Otherwise, we will give a message back to the user to say, look, in order for this to be useful, you will need to provide some input. So just a console write line, and we'll say something along the lines of you need to provide some input. Good enough. Not the greatest UX in the world, but good enough for what we want to do. Fantastic. So next I'm going to create a HTTP client, which is the main vehicle we are using to make HTTP requests. Now, in a lot of my other videos, I go on and I talk about HTTP client factories and all that kind of stuff. And that's definitely relevant in certain circumstances. But a very simple application such as this, that we just run once and then it gets torn down, the way we're going to do it here is fine. And that is to directly use the HTTP client object here, or HTTP client class, to create an object. So HTTP client, we'll call the object instance client, and then we'll just make that equal to new HTTP client. So again, I'm trying to keep this app super simple and this video really quick. So I'm not saying we're taking shortcuts, but we're keeping it simple, okay? We're keeping it simple today. And then on that client, we do want to add a default header, request header, and that is going to be our API key that we created in the last section. So when these requests are made, we need to pass our key as a bearer token to the endpoint, to the API. So we do that via headers. So we will add a header, and we need to provide two things. Firstly, what is the key, I suppose. Actually, I'll be careful here. The header key, and that is authorization. Okay, and if you are non-American like myself, just make sure you use a Z here, not an S, as you are probably tempted to do. And then the value. So this is a kind of key value pair, and the value, confusingly, is the API key as a bearer token. Okay, and we specify that by saying, yes, it's bearer. And bearer is just an authentication scheme, basically. You have basic, you have other ones as well. But bearer, very common, takes the form of a key. So bearer, space, and then we just paste in our API key that we generated in the last section. Now, of course, you're going to be screaming at the screen at the moment saying you should absolutely never paste keys into your code. You're absolutely 100% correct. You should never be pasting keys into your code like this. You know, if you commit this code to GitHub, the key is visible. I'm just doing this for the purposes of quickness, okay? Cutting a few corners really, but you would want to, in this case, I would say you would want to create a user secret to contain the key, and you would inject it in through the config layer. I cover all this in the .NET Developer Toolkit course. I know I keep going on about it, but I do cover it there. And user secrets are a free module there, so you can sign up for free and you can learn about how you could use this as a user secret over there. But we'll keep it hard-coded for the moment. Again, not best practices, but best practice, but for our purposes, it's okay. All right. The next thing we want to provide, and I might actually come back over to the OpenAPI documentation on the subject. I'll just resize the browser here. So again, we're using the completions API, and this is a REST-based API. And you can actually see here that they give you an example of how to run basically what we're going to be running as a curl request. Okay, so we need to, as you can see here, they're providing a header, just exactly as we've done, authorization header with the bearer token, as you can see here. We'll be dealing with the content type in just a minute. We will take care of that in a second. But you can see also what it requires is a model, which is, in this case, they're using the Text DaVinci 3 model. Prompt, so that's actually the text that we're going to be supplying as an argument that was put in at the command line prompt, and then these two attributes here, max tokens and temperature. Now, as you can see here, this is actually getting passed over as JSON. Okay, now again, in the interest of quickness, what we're going to do here is I'm just going to provide a string. Yeah, a string that represents that JSON, kind of like what they did there. Now, I ordinarily would not do that. I ordinarily would create an object and then serialize that using something like Newtonsoft or the Microsoft framework. But again, keeping it simple, keeping it very lightweight, we're going to create our content just as a string. I wouldn't usually do this, but it's much quicker to do it this way. So the way we do it is we're going to create some content. So I'm going to create a variable called content, and that is actually going to be something called a string content object. And that will contain our string, and it will contain a couple of other things. And one of the other things it's going to contain is the type of encoding that we want to use, and also the application JSON media type as well. So that's what this string content object gives us the ability to do. Okay, so you can see here, string content, which is the string, which we will create, encoding, and then also the media type. So we're going to be using this kind of method signature here. All right. Now, what I'm going to do, I don't like doing it, but I am going to copy from my reference code. And the code obviously for this is available on GitHub as well, so you can do that. I just feel typing this in would be way too laborious and error prone. And I will go through this. Let me just get rid of the prompt at the side here, so Control B. And this is just a string, okay? This is just a bog standard string. And you can see here we're providing model attribute, which is Text DaVinci 01, the prompt, and we're actually injecting the first argument that we are passed at the command line, the temperature and the max tokens. Now, the only thing of note is that you can see that the double quotes here, they're all delimited with a backslash, okay? And you need that, obviously. So this is basically saying this first double quote is actually the start of our string, and the one right at the very end here is the end of our string. All the other double quotes in between are being interpreted, actually with the exception of these ones here, as we're sort of concatenating a string. All the other double quotes are basically part of the string, and they're being delimited by this backslash here. All right, so hopefully that made sense. It is a bit yucky, it's a bit messy. I wouldn't usually do it this way, but it's much quicker to do it this way. Anyway, put a comma there, take a new line, we'll tab in, and we want to specify the encoding type. And we'll bring in the namespace for that. So your cursor in the word encoding, control and period, and we'll bring in using system text. And we will make that equal to UTF-8. And we'll just stay on the same line. And then the last thing we need to specify is the media type. And we just say that is application JSON. Okay. So hopefully what we've done here is clear. We've created this content object, which is of type string content. The main part of it is the string, which I've just, it's just raw string data representing the JSON that we need to provide to the API. And then finally, not finally, but for this section, we're going to use something called a HTTP response message. We'll call that response. And we will await on our client, HTTP client, and we're going to post async. So that's why we're awaiting, okay? And what we're going to post to, we're going to post to our API endpoint, which we'll supply in just a second, and we'll also supply the content that we've just created, okay? So a HTTP post request, which again is what is required. If we come back to the documentation over here, it tells you it's a post request. Okay, so we're creating, well, we're passing data as in a body, basically, is what we're doing. All right. And then just in here, it's the API endpoint. So we'll come back to the docs again, and here is the endpoint that we need. So we'll just copy that from here. And that should be the right endpoint. Let's paste that in like so. And obviously pasted in a new line at the start there, so we'll just rectify that. That's cool. And then from this, we're just going to get a string. Just to kind of wrap up this particular bit, before we get a bit more detailed, we just want to get the response string. So, and we'll just make that equal to await, and we will await on the response that we created here, content, and we will just read string async like so. And finally, we'll do a console write line. So this is our kind of MVP. We're going to make this a little bit better as we move forward, but I want to test this out now, basically. And we'll just write out the response string. Okay, so very basic, very simple. Again, just to reiterate, we check to make sure that we've got arguments passed over. If not, then we'll give this message here. If so, then we create a new HTTP client. We add a header for authorization. We add our content in a rather inelegant way, and then we simply make a post async call to this endpoint and supply our content, and then we respond back with reading our string. So let's do a clear the screen. Let's do a .NET build to make sure we haven't done anything too crazy stupid. In fact, also need to save this. Right, let's do that again. Make sure you save. Excellent, and let's do a .NET run. And we need to provide some input. Indeed, we do need to provide some input. So the way you do that is you do .NET run -- in this case, and then double quotes, and then whatever input you want. So this is treated as one argument, okay? Within the double quotes, one argument. So that's what we should be passing over. Hit enter. And we just get a JSON response string back from the API, which is looking pretty good. And you can actually see here the text. It's the text attribute that we want. So it says on a given host, new line, Docker images. Okay, so that is looking pretty good to me. It is working well. And if we just maybe take this, because it's maybe a bit difficult to read, and we copy that, and we come over to our best friend Google for the moment and type in JSON editor online. This is the tool I kind of like to use. It just helps you kind of read JSON. If we just paste that JSON response in, you can kind of tidy it up over here and push it over here. And you can see this is the kind of response that we get back. Okay, so there's a few, there's an ID, what object is it, text completion. Got a few choices come back. This is basically what we want. Okay, so in this choices array, we want the text that's responded back with. So on a given host, Docker images. Okay, which is fantastic. So maybe take a little pause here, and in the next section, what we actually want to do is take this JSON string, and we are actually going to do it the right way, and we're going to deserialize this. Okay, so it's currently serialized. We're going to deserialize it into an object so we can actually get to the various attributes, specifically that text attribute, so we can then do something with it. But quick pause, we'll do that in the next section. So we want to deserialize this JSON response so we can actually get access simply and easily to this text attribute. So let me just get rid of the command prompt here, and I'll bring the File Explorer back up by doing Control B in Visual Studio Code. And just to remind you, when we scaffolded our app up, we did include this Newtonsoft JSON package, which is what we're going to use now. Okay, so back over here, we have this response string, which is just our serialized JSON. We want to deserialize that now. And it's pretty simple using the Newtonsoft stuff. So I'm going to put it in a try-catch block anyway, just in case it does throw an error. So we'll catch the exception first if there is any, and call it EX. And if there is an exception, we'll just do a console write line. And we'll say something along the lines of, we'll use string interpolation because we want to write out the error message. if we have any, and we'll just say could not deserialize the JSON, and we'll provide the exception message in our response like that. Okay, should be okay though. Now, the reason I'm actually using the Newtonsoft JSON package and not the system text JSON package provided by Microsoft is for the very feature I'm going to use now. And the very feature I'm going to use now, I am conflicted about it, because what Newtonsoft JSON allows you to do is to dynamically deserialize JSON. What does that mean? It means that you just give it a JSON string and it will work out what that object is. Okay, you don't actually have to provide an object definition and deserialize into it. Okay, so it's kind of non-typed. Okay, you end up with this dynamic object that's not typed, and I don't like that. Okay, it's the kind of thing you can do in JavaScript and stuff like that. One of the reasons I love C# is because it's a strongly typed language and you kind of avoid all that. So I'm kind of breaking one of my cardinal rules, but the reason I'm breaking it, again, is time. Okay, it's quicker to do it this way. And again, if you want to learn about the way I think you should properly deserialize JSON, again, check out my course on lesjackson.net. Anyway, enough of that. So we're going to create some dynamic data. And if you didn't really follow what I meant by that, you'll see in a second. Okay, and we're going to make use of the Newtonsoft JSON framework. So JSON convert. And I'll bring in the namespace for that. So control period, bring in Newtonsoft JSON. And then we will deserialize object. And what type of object are we going to deserialize into? Well, this is where you can supply this dynamic keyword, okay? Now, usually you would supply an actual object that you had created, or a class type that you had created over here, you know. Here you can just supply dynamic, and the Newtonsoft framework will figure it out for you. And what are you deserializing from? Well, just this response string that we have here. Okay, so I dislike it, but I also really love it at the same time, because when you're just getting stuff, when you want to just get stuff up and running quickly and test it out, this is really, really useful, to be honest with you. Okay, anyway, so we'll change the color of the text output. So we'll say console foreground color equals console color green, just to distinguish the output. And then what we're going to say is we're going to console write line the following. And again, we'll use string interpolation, and we'll say something like API responses. Okay, now obviously we did write out the full string response, okay, previously. We want to just get the text response. If I bring up this command prompt again, we just want to get this here. In fact, we just want to get this here on a given host. That's all we really want here, okay? And so we can get to that by using this data object. So curly brackets, data, and this is where you enter into the danger zone, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically navigate through that object. But again, because it's a dynamic object, at this point in time, I can supply anything I like, and it will only be at runtime that you would get some issues. So I'm going to say choices. And again, let's come back. Hopefully I still have it here. Yep. So basically I'm navigating through this object. So I'm coming down to this choices, attribute here. And then I'm going to navigate into the text attribute here, okay? That's all I'm doing. And of course, choices is an array. So square brackets, first element, and then the actual text property, okay? And you can see we weren't getting any code completion assistance here, because at this point in time, C# does not know that this is what we're going to be getting. It's not statically typed, okay? So it's dangerous. And I also want to get rid of that warning. That warning was just saying that this data could be null, which indeed it could be. So again, this is a super dangerous thing I'm doing here, which is why I put it in a try-catch block, because it could not work, okay? And for me personally, in a production type environment, I would not do this. I'm just doing this because it's quick and easy, all right? And then finally, we just want to reset the color. So console reset color, just back to whatever it is, gray or something. All right, let's give that a go and bring up our command prompt again. We'll clear the screen, up key, up key. Let's just ask it the same thing. There we go, and it's saying API response is on your system Docker images, okay? And again, I'm still writing out the full JSON response, okay? But that's good. We've actually navigated straight to the text element that we want. All right, that's cool. We're in a good spot now. So we could leave it there, but what I want to do, as you saw in the demo, is take it a little step further, and we'll work with the text response that we've isolated from our API call, and I want to try and isolate the command prompt string within the overall text response, because what you'll see when you call the API multiple times, even with the same question, number one, you might get slightly different responses back. Usually always has the same command prompt in it, but what you'll maybe see is additional text in there, maybe like, you know, a link to an article or a bit more description about what the command does. And I don't necessarily, that's quite useful as of itself, but in terms of just being able to have a nice quick workflow where we can use the command prompt in our command line, at our command line, and just copy and paste it at the point when we need it, I want to try and isolate that bit of text. So that's what we're going to do next. So again, yeah, the workflow is we get a response back, we isolate the command prompt, copy it to clipboard, and then we can simply do a Control V to paste it in at the command prompt when we're happy it's the right one. Now, the routine that we're going to write to isolate the command prompt is super simple. Actually, all we're doing is looking for the last line of text in the overall response of the text component. Now that works, I would say maybe about 60–70% of the time. The remaining time it doesn't really work, because you'll get the last line might be something else, or the last line might contain the command prompt along with some other text, okay? So it's not totally accurate, and we could absolutely work on this method that we're going to develop now and make it much, much better, much more accurate, but it's a first pass. Keeping it simple, keeping it quick, I think it's okay. So back over in our code, let's get rid of the command prompt, and I'm going to create, as I said, a separate method to try and guess or isolate the command prompt from our text component in the API response. So static method returns a string, we'll call it guess command, and we're just going to pass in string, which is just this bit here, the text component of our API response, this thing that we were displaying on screen. Okay, that's it. I'm going to take that in. And so I'm just going to do a little bit of debugging here just to help us along. You may want to turn this off at some point, but just for the purposes of this video and my sanity, I'm going to put this in. And we'll say GPT-3 API returned text. Okay. Then what I'll do is we'll change the color of the console text, just so we can kind of differentiate. And we'll say console color yellow. Excellent. And then we'll just write it out to the screen. Console right line. And it'll just pump out the raw string. Excellent. And then our methodology for isolating it, as I said, is super simple. We just want to get the last, well, we just want to isolate the last line of the body, and the way I'm going to do that is just to get the index of the last new line character. So using our raw string, we'll get the last index of, and we'll just look for a new line character. Now, if there isn't a new line character, we'll just return I think it returns 0 or whatever, I can't remember, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, this routine will just return the string. And then we'll just make our guess, so we'll create another string to contain our guess. We call it guess, and we'll make that equal to raw substring last index plus 1. Okay, and that will give us, you know, the string from that index onwards. We'll reset the console color. so we're not writing out yellow any longer. And then the other thing we want to do while we're thinking about it is, if you remember back over here, we did add this text copy package. I want to copy our guess to the clipboard anyway. Even if it's a bad guess, I just want to do that anyway. So we'll use text copy, clipboard service, set text, and we'll just put guess into it. And yeah, as I said at the kind of, a bit earlier on, copying a string to the clipboard from a console application is not really an expected use case, and so there isn't really, the support for it is not that, well, you can do it other ways outside of using this, but this is a nice way of doing it, I think, to be honest with you. All right, cool, so that's our guess command function or method completed. So we'll just come back up here and we'll just jiggle this around a little bit and we'll make use of it. So after making our deserialization call here, we're going to create a string, call it guess, and we'll make that equal to guess command, and we'll just pass through this. Fantastic. We'll set the foreground color to green, and then we'll just change this console write line to something a little different. We'll actually write out the guess, and we will say my guess at the command prompt is, and we will put out guess. All right, and then we'll reset the color there as well. And what I'll also do is we will just remove this. And that was just writing out the full. Actually, we'll leave, I'll just comment out just in case we want to re-enable it again. Just saves a bit of typing, but I don't want to do that. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. So let's give that a go now. Make sure it's saved, control backtick, clear the screen. We'll do an up key, run this again. Excellent. So you can see here, GPT-3 API returned the text on the host. So all this stuff in yellow is what we actually got back from GPT on the host. A couple of new lines, Docker images. And so then our little guess routine has run, and we've just isolated the last line, which is Docker images. And if we do a Control V, it was copied to clipboard, and we have that command available for us. And say I don't actually have Docker running, so this will error, but that is the right command prompt. Excellent, looking good. Let's just try it again, see if we get a different response back, which I have seen. Yeah, so you can see it's ever so slightly different. We didn't have that, I can't remember what the last one said, but there was a kind of another bit of yellow text there saying something. This one is slightly different, but again, working quite nicely. Excellent. So the last step of our build is I want to take our application and I want to package it into a single executable so that we can actually use it in anger at our command prompt by just using the ask command. Okay, so the moment we're using Docker run, I want to be able to type ask and then pass in, whatever we want to ask it, and have that as a little command line utility that we can run on our machine. So we'll do that next. So in terms of creating a single file executable, I'm just following this document here that Microsoft have provided, and I'll put the link in the description below so you can take a look. Now, basically, what you'll need to do is you'll have to add some of these attributes to your CS proj file within your property group. So we'll do that. And then you need to publish the app for a specific platform and architecture, processor architecture. So this is actually the command I'm going to eventually run, .NET publish -r win x64, because I'm running on Windows with this particular processor architecture, and they've even given you an example below if you're running on Linux. Okay, so it's slightly different from just using .NET Run, which is just ubiquitous. You can run that on Linux, Mac, Windows, and it'll just run. If you want to produce this single file executable, you actually need to target the specific platform. So you need to create an exe for each platform, which I don't think is unrealistic or unreasonable. Okay, so just calling that out. So let's not take too much more time. I'll get rid of the command line prompt. Back over in our CS proj file, yeah, we're just going to add in some attributes within our property group. And I'm just going to paste those in. I don't think you want to see me typing those. I kind of have this rule where I prefer to type code. I don't really type config. I'd kind of consider this config. And it's literally just the stuff lifted and shifted from that article anyway. So these four are the ones that I kind of showed you in the article. So let's bring it back onto screen here. They are just these four here. And then you'll have noticed there's a fifth one there that I've also put in, and that comes down to here. It's just this one here, and that's about including the PDB file inside the bundle as well. Okay, so I've just included that as well. So we definitely just end up with one file. So we'll save that off, and then all we need to do, bring up the command prompt again, clear the screen, and we will just publish that executable for my particular platform, which is Windows on the x64 architecture. Here we are. So let's copy this. Maybe we should have used our application to see if it would give us that command prompt. I'm not that brave though, so let's go for it, and we will see what happens. Okay, perfect. And it's this path here that you can see. So my, this is my working directory. If we follow this path all the way along, there is an executable at this end point here. So if I just bring Windows Explorer onto the screen, I've just navigated to ask bin debugnet 6.0. Here's the architecture folder. We go in there, there's a publish, and then we have our ask executable. Excellent, so that's looking good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it into my E1 folder. Yeah, let's put it into E1. Okay, so it's now sitting at, my D drive, S6, E1, and I now want to add this entry to my path variable, to my path environment variable. So path environment variable just stores the paths of where your command prompt, amongst other things, can find executable files. So on Windows, I've just clicked on the little search icon. If you just start typing environment, you should get something like this, edit system environment variables. And that just popped up on my other screen. Here we go, and I'll just go into the environment variable settings. This is what I want to add an entry to, so path. We'll click edit. And as you can see here are all the different segments that, executable files can be found at. So I'm just going to add a new one. It'll be on my D drive, on my, let me get this right, season 6 folder in the episode 1 directory. And I'm not sure if it makes any difference, but I'll just put, I don't think it does, but I'll just put a trailing backslash as well. So that's definitely correct. Yep, looks good. So we'll click OK, OK, OK on that. Perfect. And then we'll start a command prompt here. And what that should allow us to do, assuming it read in the path environment variable okay, it should allow us just to be able to type ask. And then, assuming I can spell ask correctly, and let's just try this one here. So what command do you use to hot reload a .NET project? And it should just go away and work as before. So again, GPT-3 return the text. And then there's a couple of new lines, and then this is the whole of the last line. And so again, as per our guess, it's just guessed that this is the whole line. So if we do a Control V, not exactly what we want. Do you know what I mean? And so we could definitely iterate around the guessing routine to try and isolate, the .NET Watch component. But I think that could actually get quite tricky, to be honest with you. I've been thinking about how you could do that. I think it would be quite tricky. If you have any ideas, please put them in the description below. But as you've seen, for other ones, it seems to work quite well. So what command do you use to list Docker containers? Let's see what we get. And again, we get some, question mark, a couple of new lines, and then my guess is Docker PS, which again, Control V is there at the command prompt for us, and we can just run that. Excellent. So that brings us to the end of this, hopefully relatively quick video. I've really enjoyed working with this API. There's actually loads of other endpoints that you can explore and play around with. You can create images and all that kind of stuff. It's really rather cool. But for me, I actually enjoy this little command prompt, and I'm going to see if I might use it in my actual workings as a developer. It saves me having to go and Google things outside of my developer workflow. And if there was one thing I was going to change, firstly, it would be the functionality of this guessing routine. And then I would obviously go back and I would productionize things like not storing the API key in the code. And yeah, there's a few other things, yeah, not having the JSON as a string and all that kind of stuff. So there's loads of stuff you can do to really tighten this up and make it much better. Again, the code is on GitHub, so you can maybe have a go at doing that yourself. Anyway, that's it for this video. I've really enjoyed making it. It's lovely to have you with me. If you did enjoy it, maybe give it a like. And if you've not done so already, maybe think about subscribing to the channel. Other than that, to my Patreon supporters, thank you for that extra support, and your names are coming up next.